First of all, Tara, welcome. It's been a long, long time since I met Tara. I think the last time I met you must have been Begum Somru. But which is, what year is that?
1996.
So that's a hell of a long time.
Yeah.
In those days, she was this nice Tara Deshpande, GSB girl, and now she's got a Tenenbaum in her surname, which is very interesting.
Careful, huh? That
Is that
Tenenbaum
it?
is sitting
It's
here.
right, yeah. Well, the last one I heard was of the Royal Tenenbaums, which was quite a cult film in its time. That's the second time I heard the surname. I've never heard of it after that. Okay, I think I'm extremely happy to be here because I finished reading Tara's book, which is great because I land up not finishing most books. It's a great book called The Sense of Spice, and it's recipes and stories from a Konkan kitchen, where she comes from. And the subject today, which is very apt with the book actually, is food, culture, and people, which is pretty much what your opening paragraphs and the text matter beyond the recipes in the book deals with. And I want to jump straight into one part of the book, which I think will encompass all about food, culture, and people, And being a food guy, I'm going to talk about food. So I know you'd enjoy it because the book is clearly an expression of how much you enjoy your food. I want to talk about the curry. Just simply the word the curry. It's something that has been misused all over the world. I have come to the conclusion that a curry essentially has to have coconut in it. Am I correct?
Not always, but a lot of them do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the way you use the word curry, which came originally from the word curry, which came from the word curry patta. Apparently, an Englishman was eating something down south in one of their summer, winter, autumn, fall capitals, in India. And he asked what it was, and somebody said, "What is this thing floating around in the so-called dish?" And someone said, "Curry patta," and he couldn't pronounce it, and it became curry, and that became curry, and everything that was gravy-based and a little bit spicy and Indian became a curry.
Sure.
But you have curries in the north, for instance, that don't have coconut in them. Several curries down south that do. You call a yogurt curry also. So there are different kinds of,
Curries.
versions of curries. And that's one of the interesting things about writing this book, is to tell people that everything is not just a curry. There are different techniques of making things. There's a different history behind each dish, and the ingredients vary drastically. So just as the French would, distinguish between different kinds of stews with great passion, God forbid if you ever think a pot of pho is a Danube or a bourguignon is the same thing as a pot of pho, you'll get a long lecture. So here too, we've got different kinds of curries, and it's not just a curry.
Okay. So now, speaking of the curry itself, at least the curry that we know it as on the Konkan coast, and maybe then going past the Konkan coast, even going up towards the east of India, the curry, as it changes from region to region, from every 20 to 30 kilometers, 40 kilometers, as we go down the coast, also talks about the people and their culture, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it does. The way you make things depends, of course, on what's locally available. It depends on, I mean, from the research, to me, I've seen that, the Kula Devtas or the gods that people pray to affects the kind of food they eat. And there are techniques that, for instance, in the way a fish curry would be made in Goa is quite different from the way it would be made 2 hours away in Karwar. So yes, it does. It does vary a lot.
And just to go a little more into detail of what he was saying, for example, the fish curry made in Goa vis-a-vis the one made in Karwar, how is it different? And two is that how is the culture bringing the difference into the curry there?
Well, I'll give you a small example. For instance, certain festivals, for instance, certain communities, when they cook for Lord Ganesh, they will not use anything that is red in color.
Oh.
Yeah, apparently red is not a color for Lord Ganesh. I'm not sure exactly why. I'm still trying to discover that. But you don't do it. Now, for instance, in Karwar, when we make a curry, there's one particular one I'll talk about. There are many different kinds. We do a couple of peculiar things. For instance, you'll fry onions with green chilies first. And in the masala that's ground up, also you will have a little bit of onion and you will have a little bit of green chili. You don't do that necessarily in a Goan curry. Yeah, it's a very subtle difference, but it will make the curry taste very different. Now, in a Goan curry, you may have vinegar, you may have, as a souring agent, but normally in Karwari curries, you'd either have chintz or you'd have the, kokum.
Kokum.
Of course, down south in Kerala also kokum is used, and again, it would be used in specific curries and not in other curries. So it does vary quite a bit.
Tell me, while you were doing your research for essentially the Konkan area, if you look at the rest of the country as well, cultural differences, and there are huge cultural differences as you travel around most of the country, do you find it influencing food habits? Depending upon the region you come from, not because, oh, we say, okay, fine, I mean, sweetwater fish is a Bengali thing, or, the North Indians don't eat fish, or Gujarat is vegetarian, or whatever. These are just generalizations.
Yeah.
But did you come across anything which sort of defines the area and hence defines the food?
Well, I mean, for starters, in North India, Amritsari fish tikka is very famous. It's one of the famous dishes if you go to Amritsar. So, they have a lake there, so they fish for, so it's not like in North India, they don't eat seafood. It's just less abundantly available than it is on the Konkan coast. I think, there are pockets, obviously, in India where, because of geographically where you're from, you would eat more rice versus wheat. You would have more peanuts in your food versus almonds. For instance, in the Konkan coast, we tend to use cashew nuts a lot, either used whole or ground up and put into curries like a shakuti, for instance, as a paste. As you go up north, you tend to find that there's more badam in things. You grind badams to make a chicken badami or something like that. Of course, you also use cashew nuts, but it tends to be, we also use the fruit here to make the famous feni in Goa.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, and as I said again, Vaishnavites, for instance, will make their panchamrut, which is for exactly the same purpose as the Konkans would make a kairas. But they're different things, even though they're used for specifically the same religious reasons. But that's how it's made. And so now we eat a lot of coconut along the Konkan coast. And you'll find, for instance, that, we have a small Jewish community in the Konkan
Alibag.
coast. Yeah, we have the
Alibag,
Bene Israelis, the Baghdadi Jews, and a couple of other communities. But what's interesting for them is, they follow kashrut, so you can't mix milk with meat. It's been very easy in the Konkan because you substitute coconut milk for milk.
For milk.
And you maintain those laws. And of course, the cuisine is delicious and unusual because of that. So things do differ based on where you are. And, there's also a reason certain communities stay in a certain place.
Yeah, you even find it, say, in places like Rajasthan and all that, because this kher sagri that they all eat in Rajasthan, or gatte ki sabzi, it's all kind of food which is can be preserved.
Exactly.
Because there is no great vegetation or food available over there.
Yeah.
Hence,
They dry their vegetables
they dry
and
it.
they use them.
But I want to come to what you just spoke about, which is the Panchamrut, which is an interesting concept. Will you just explain the Panchamrut, what it is?
It's equal parts of ghee, milk, honey, the panchamrut, the churning of the seas. And in kairas we have it's coconut, and sometimes there's capsicum. Generally we use some kind of seed, and it's all ground up together to make sort of a thick, brothy thing that you can eat either with rice or just as it is. But we do it at weddings and stuff. You always have it there. But it's something that you associate with Shaivites. Panchamrut you associate with Vaishnavites. So it's just the way they do it. We may have the same myth, but the myth will be slightly differently interpreted depending on where you are. I'm not an expert on North Indian food, but, so it depends on how the texts are interpreted.
I just want, it's very interesting because you're a GSB, which is a Gaud Saraswat Brahman. I am a very small community of Maharashtrians called Pathare Prabhus. And we have our roots in Bombay. 700 years in Bombay. So we don't have any village to go to. Holidays were never spent as beautifully as yours were in in Belgaum and Karwar. So we went to holidays to Hanging Garden, literally. So that was our holiday. And so in the cuisine of my community, I think we've assimilated the best of all kind of food, And the Panchamrut, for example, if there is a puja in the house, there's a Satyanarayan puja or something in the house, then the Panchamrut, which is given as tirtha to everybody, is this dahi, honey, little ghee in it, and just milk and stirred and given. But on a wedding day, there's a Panchamrut which we made, which is made out of garam masala and dry fruit in it. So it's this spicy chutney, which my mouth is watering now, which is because you don't get it, man, anymore. When all the elders are getting older and older, this food, preserving this food has become so difficult,
Yeah.
So I think we've, in a way, taken a bit of this also and taken a bit of that also.
Yeah.
and form this thing. But tell me, when you were doing this book, for example, there is a lot that came out of your memory. Okay, because you've actually gone and having done your cathedral St. Xavier's College and lived in South Bombay, etc., very few people of your age group, your generation, who grew up in South Bombay, embraced their roots as well as you did, which is apparent through the book, you know. So one is your memories that you've put down. How much research did you do? Because this book is fairly well researched in terms of the detailing of the Kshatriyas, the GSB as a community itself, which I think you should speak about a little bit even here. And I had no idea that when you say the Konkan coast, which includes Bombay all the way down to, say,
Mangalore.
Mangalore.
From Thane, Raigad, all the way down to Mangalore.
Because one always thought of Bombay as not being part of the Konkan coast.
Very much a part of the Konkan coast.
Or let me put it another way. As people who lived in Mumbai, Bombay, were Konkani people. You know, we never thought of it. Konkani people who started speaking Konkani after you get into Ratnagiri and Malwad and all that.
Correct.
Yeah?
Well, I mean, that's one of the reasons I specifically said it's not a Konkani kitchen in the title. It's a Konkan kitchen because that makes a big difference. In the Konkan, you have people who speak many languages and are still of Konkani. They could be hybrid. They could, you know, their descent is Konkani by virtue of either having lived there for many generations or having assimilated the culture. So if you say Konkani, that would mean somebody who speaks that language. But people speak Marathi, people speak Tullu, people speak, you know, Malvan, and there are many, many other sub-dialects. People who are from my community would speak Kannada also. So my intention when I wrote this book was not just merely to wax eloquent about the GSB community. It was to basically share for the, you know, with people how important it is for us to treasure these very fine nuances and these complexities in our culture, in our cuisine, and in the amazing diversity that we have in this country. And that rather than sort of creating differences, to enjoy those differences, because I mean, just look at what we have. I mean, it's incredible. And a lot of the things that you know, our grandparents used to do, they don't do it anymore. We don't do it anymore because we don't have time. Everywhere you look, you see cookbooks which are about how to do things fast, how to do things easy. But in that, which is great because, you know, many women today are working and not as many men are still cooking in the kitchen. Kunal, you have to encourage men to cook in the kitchen. You know, so it's still the woman's responsibility. And so people obviously, you know, they have kids, they have to go to work. They can't be cooking recipes that are going to take, you know, 6-7 hours and 3 days of pre-prep. So even while selecting the recipes in this book, I was kind of careful. I wanted to make them genuine. I didn't want shortcuts in the recipes. But I also chose recipes that were slightly easier. There are a couple that are hard in this, that are difficult
And
to
they
do in
should
this
be.
book. Because that's who we are, and that's what, you know, Indian food is no pain, no gain kind of situation. My intention was to capture that even along such a small, narrow strip, and I've only really covered 1 or 2 communities. There are many, many more. I mean, you could write an entire book on Patari Prabhu cuisine. If you go to Goa, for instance, small communities could write entire recipe books just about their families and what they used to cook. So for me, it's been fascinating because I wanted to capture stuff about the community, but I also wanted to capture stuff about technique. You know, when I was studying in the US and I went to culinary school, we were being taught always what is called classic technique, which is French. And I would always ask, why is it classic technique? I mean, for you it's classic, but for me, Indian cooking is classic. But if the glossary itself took me 1 year to write, and the rest of the research took another 3 years. Because even though we live in the Konkan, there isn't that much information about how we cook and about the techniques of all these cooking. For if, you know, we're familiar with kokam, but do we know what bilimbi is? Do we know what ambade is? Do we know what, you know, there's so many unusual ingredients. Dagar fool is, you know, do you know what dagar fool is? Okay, you know. Dagar fool is lichen flour or stone flour, and it looks like dried up pencil shavings. But it's a very essential ingredient in some of the masalas that are made, and one of the most classic masalas here is the goda masala. And, you know, it's only so much. It's like hing, you know, you only use so much, but it makes a difference to the dish. It's the same thing with dagar fool. If you don't put it in goda masala, it just doesn't taste like, yeah, it doesn't work. So to save these wonderful things we have, you know, for future generations. And also the intention was that if you're traveling through the Malvan or through the Konkan, if there's a word you suddenly see in a menu, or an ingredient in a shop, you could look it up in the glossary.
And you know what
You'd know what it is. I mean, it's impossible for me to say that I've got everything in there, but, I spend a lot of time trying to get as many ingredients and, as many terms, names of communities as I could into the glossary.
And the whole business of Malwani food or Gomantak food or Konkani food, because often all these three words are considered the same, and especially in Mumbai now and in Pune a little while, a little bit, this cuisine is picking up as an option to say butter
Mughlai
chicken
food,
and naan,
yeah.
but it's not that generalized, is it? I mean, Malwad eventually is one small village in the Konkan. And so the whole cuisine can't be based out of Malwad. And Gomantak food, which is again Goan, Hindu food, there are vast differences between these cuisines, aren't there?
There are.
Yeah.
There are lots of differences. I mean, in the Malwan, for instance, there are lots of dishes made with different parts of a banana.
Yeah.
Kale phulwadi, for instance, or the kale phul dosa. That's another interesting thing. You always associate dosa with the south, but the Konkan has a huge number of dosas, which we call poles, made from like really interesting fruits, vegetables. Some poles are made just from the peel of certain vegetables. And you just don't associate it with Konkan food. But if you go to a traditional Konkani family, they're making all kinds of poles.
Ghaune and pole and all that, yeah.
And there's a whole, you have pancakes, you have poles, you have, semi-poles. I mean, you can write a book just on that.
Yeah, but you also say in the book, which actually explains exactly what you're saying, is that the dosa was not invented in Tamil Nadu, but it was invented in Udupi. Did you say that?
There'll be a dosa war now.
Let's have it. But it's not in your book, that I read it somewhere else. It's in your book.
I'll
Yeah?
feign lack of.
Well, but they say Udupi is
a part of the Konkan, actually.
Part of the Konkan eventually,
yeah.
Mangalore, Udupi is all there.
So we've claimed all the dosas, idlis, everything as
part of the Konkan.
No, but yeah, Udupi is, so yes. It's just that we call them by different names and we make them somewhat differently. I mean, I think while I was researching dosas, what we call dosas in India, I unearthed at least 342 I think that was the number, I still have it in my head, of different kinds of
varieties
dosas.
of
Which include Kerala and, the whole of the south. And I was like, wow. The French have like how many cheeses?
I don't know. I don't know.
We've got more dosas than cheeses, yeah.
Yeah, true.
And none of them are smelly.
Yeah, one thing I'd also like to talk about is since we are talking about people and cultures, the Gaur Saraswat Brahmin community, fairly vast. I'm closely associated because my mother married a Rajadaksha, so I have a little bit of Saraswat side influence coming in from a late childhood. Originally from Kashmir, they say, the Saraswats?
Yeah, because of the migrations. There were 4 or 5 different migrations of the Saraswat community. And the belief is that it all began with the Indus Valley civilization and the river Saraswati. And when that river dried up and they couldn't feed themselves anymore, they started to move. That was the first migration. So it's believed that it started in the northeast part of India, in Kashmir, which in a sense is the bed of civilization for this entire country, really. Well, not the entire country, but large parts of it. So yeah, a lot of Kashmiri Pandits, if you speak to them, their roots, their prayers, a lot of the things that they do are very Saraswat in nature.
And they're non-vegetarian also.
Yeah.
The Kashmiri Pandits.
Very bad.
Very bad. Yeah. And then I'd heard another theory, which is similar.
Lots of theories.
Yeah, but that the Gaud Saraswat Brahmins, again, came from the Saraswati River, migrated down from Kashmir first was Bengal. Because right outside Calcutta is a place called Gaud. And the Kshatriyas who were ruling Bengal did not have priests or intelligent people don't smile, just because I called you intelligent.
No, first he set the base by saying he has some Saraswat in him. Now...
I don't. Genetically none. Influence, yes. They needed priests to conduct their prayers, which they didn't have any priests in Bengal. So then they brought this whole bunch of Pandits down from the Kashmir area after the Saraswati dried up or went underground or whatever the myth is. And they all settled in a place called Gaud. Post which then they came towards the Konkan coast and towards Mangalore and Karnataka and Belgaum and Karwar and all that. So there are theories and theories.
There are several theories. I mean, I think one of the main theories is that of Lord Parshurama.
Yes.
And we call the Konkan his Karma Bhumi. Do you know who Lord Parshurama was? Okay. Basically, Parshurama went to Shiva and was devoted to him and prayed to him, but he didn't tell him that he was a Brahmin and he couldn't study warfare. And Shiva taught him everything. And then when Shiva found out that he'd been lied to, he cursed Lord Parshurama. But after cursing him, he also asked him to do him a big favor, which was to go and save the Saraswats who were dying along the river Saraswati and bring them down to the Konkan coast. Well, he didn't tell them to bring them to the Konkan coast, but he said take them somewhere safe. So Parshuram decided to bring them to his neighborhood. But he had become very powerful. His father had been killed by a Kshatriya and he was very upset about it. So he basically massacred all the Kshatriyas and there was no one left to rule that region. And he became very powerful. So Lord Varuna of the sea was upset that there was someone on the earth who was more powerful than he was. So he decided to attack. But of course, he wasn't able to win. And Parshurama safely put the Saraswats in the Konkan area. And so we worship him. Even though he's not a god, you do have temples dedicated to Parshurama.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, he's one of the Dashavatar, isn't he?
Yes. Yeah.
Parshuram is one of the Dashavatar.
Yeah. His father was one of the main, the
Yeah.
9 sages.
Correct. So Tara, congratulations on the book. I think I've thoroughly enjoyed reading it. Yeah.
Thank you.
I hope to thoroughly enjoy cooking from it now.
I hope so.
Yeah, I will. I get inspired occasionally and step into the kitchen. So I will. And it warms my heart to see these recipes because these are recipes that need to be preserved. They need to be popularized. And then people need to be told about them. It's very difficult to be the ambassador for all cultures. But if we, just as people, are ambassador for at least our own culture, which we grew up with, I think at least be aware of the culture that we grew up with, know about it, study it a bit, figure out where your family came from. It's always interesting to have a certain sense of background of what made you what you are. And I think you've done an excellent job of that, and it's great. And I'm hoping that people sitting out there will participate, will ask any questions. Anybody read the book yet? Anybody seen the book yet? If not, please buy it. Huh? Yeah. Oh, you have it. Okay.
Kunal rightly said, so many of these recipes are dying out, and this is not true just for the recipes and food along the Konkan coast, but other parts of.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not necessarily saying you should do, but I'm saying, can't there be someone who takes an initiative and then says either has an outlet or a restaurant which sells these type of masalas or already pre-cooked food? What is the potential for such things to keep these alive?
If you seek them out, if you seek out these sub-cuisines and you seek out to buy these ingredients, there are neighborhoods where you will find them. They're not necessarily available at big supermarkets or big chains. But if you find the specialty stores, for instance, for Konkan food, if you go to Thakurdwar or you go to Kalba Devi, or you go to Dadar, to Ranade Road, you will find these ingredients. But for starters, you have to know about them and have interest in them and then go. But it would be helpful, obviously, if some of these more esoteric ingredients were available at big chains or at big supermarkets.
Ingredients, even pre-cooked dishes,
Yeah, this cuisine, I feel, it's a little difficult to do pre-cooked because so much of it is quickly cooked and fresh because a lot of it is seafood also.
Yeah.
Which is also one of the reasons why this cuisine has not spread as fast as other cuisines that can be preserved better.
True. Also, I'll tell you one more thing is that in terms of popularity, eventually you're going to try and find a restaurant which serves a good Malwani meal or a good Konkani meal. And you will find that most of these restaurants are always smaller restaurants, simply, and they make the food for the day, and once it's over, yeah? And there are also restaurants which do what is called the frying pan cooking, which every restaurant does, because they cannot cook a huge batch of one particular dish and then hope that people will take it, so they will only make portions, cook in portions. This cuisine per se, especially the gravy, the curries and all, you cannot do on a frying pan. You know what I'm saying? Unlike Mughlai food, which we have mastered today, Original Mughlai food, which requires slow cooking, you cannot do on a frying pan. But we've mastered the technique of serving Chinese food and Mughlai food on a frying pan on demand per plate. You know,
In the same restaurant.
in the same restaurant, in the same restaurant, yeah. And
Multi-cuisine.
I'll give you a very simple example. I don't want to name the place because I just don't want to. I don't want to name the place. But I discovered a small takeaway very close to my house at Prabhadevi where I live, and it's inside one lane somewhere. And my driver brought the recipe, the menu card, and I said, "Hey." So they've got sukha mutton, sukha chicken, and rasat, whatever, curries, furries, bade, but everything. Okay. So I went there. And since it's a pure takeaway, there's only a kitchen. There's no sitting space. So I was sitting in the kitchen while he was making my order. And the minute I saw him cooking on the frying pan, I said, this cannot be the way it should be made because some things take time to cook. You can't help it, And I tasted the food back home, and it was not. It had too much onion. The onion hadn't cooked well. The onion needs to be assimilated with the rest of the curry. You can't have pieces of onion in your mouth. At the same time, there is another stall which is outside Ranade Road, on the road, who sells you the same Malwani food, which is cooked at home, comes in tapelis, in handis, and when it's over, it's over, because he's cooked it at home. That food is spectacularly better than this, And people don't want to eat it. Trust me, you go to Goa, in any hotel that you stay in, they don't serve you Goan food. They serve you butter chicken. And I have nothing against, I love butter chicken.
Yeah, I do too.
But we don't want to eat it, although things are changing slightly.
They are changing. I mean, just during my time in the States, I used to get so mad. I used to go to Indian restaurants to eat once in a while, and the food was just lousy. They'd be selling you something that they called a vindaloo, and it was a brown masala, okay, and it was made with I was like, what is this? And people eat it and they think that this is Indian food. And it's really upsetting. But in the last 10 years, just as there has been a realization there that there are very, very fine aspects to the cuisine, and people know more and more now. They check things up on the internet, they buy books, they download stuff on Kindle. They know that, a vindaloo is supposed to be bright red, that a good vindaloo is judged by the color as much as by the taste. So
And should be made of pork.
Yes. Chickens are bad. And so things have, in India too now, people are, just see how the change, for instance, in your approach to chocolate eating in India. Now people know what is dark chocolate, how much milk fats are there in chocolate versus real cocoa bean, how much bang are you getting for your buck. People know good cheese from bad cheese. For a culture, it's a learning process, not just assimilating cultures that are not food cultures that are not Indian, but your own. So yeah, you should try to seek out stuff that's really authentic, and the taste will always is the best barometer. If it tastes really, really good, it's probably the real thing.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to learn some recipes from my grandmom this summer, like original recipes, and she has been teaching me all this, but how did you go about doing such extensive research of the whole Konkan belt? Because I'm finding it difficult to learn so many recipes from one person. How did you manage that?
It took 4 years. And my editor was like, where's the book? Where's the book? Because it took that long. And as I was telling him earlier, there wasn't that much information available, considering, that I'm only covering one community and I'm making mention of some others, that there just wasn't that much information. I mean, there were so many ingredients, for instance, that I couldn't find an English term for. It took me a long time to figure out what is bilimbi in English, what is ambade in English, and how not to confuse the two together. It took a really long time. We have certain pots and pans in Konkan cuisine that are very specific to the way we cook. What are their names? And what can I, when I translate them, what can I call them? It took time. And it was very useful to me that I had my grandmother's recipe books, all, 50 or 60 of them, of which this is just a very small part. And she was very meticulous. She's right here. She was very meticulous about drawing things, writing things down. And so that really helped. It made it easier.
Two questions. First question was, I'm hearing you talk about the recipes. In terms of your training in the US, how were you able to incorporate that into the Indian cuisine, and what did you learn that was different from the Indian cuisine?
Well, I mean, I started first by teaching it. I just got married and I moved, and I was looking for something to do. Someone said they're looking for an Indian cooking instructor. So I said, oh, well, this is, I know something about how to cook Indian food, so maybe I'll go and try it. And I'll meet people that way. So I showed up there, and I think they couldn't find anyone else, so they hired me. And it was a learning experience for me because, we're used to doing everything by andaza. Ek chimut hai, ek haath barun hai, ek halat, that's how we cook. But Americans are not like that. They want everything specifically, 1 teaspoon, 1 tablespoon. They want scientific explanations of why this takes so long to cook. Like somebody asked me, why are you cooking the onions so much? What's the point? Because in Italian food, you saute lightly and then that's the end. So the reason you do it is because it releases starch. When you cook onions to a certain temperature and to a certain point, and that's what makes the curries thick. So if you don't cook it enough, those curries you get where everything floats on the surface? It's because the masala was not bunad enough. It was not cooked properly. So I had to learn, because I had to give answers to people because they asked me questions I didn't have answers for. So being very specific and using standard measures and sizes helps because you can consistently reproduce the same thing again and again. So that's one thing that I learned. I also learned that they have a great deal of respect and for all their techniques. They put everything down. There's an explanation for every single term, So if you ask somebody, what does deglaze a pan mean? There's a whole 6 pages of deglazing a pan, what the technique is, So here, for instance, if we have interesting techniques too. We use, for instance, let's say, we put things in a smoker, in the Konkan we call it a dhuvan, and we smoke things. Eggplants may be smoked, and turmeric roots may be smoked, and we make bangda kiss, so you put the bangda in it and you smoke it slowly. And we have techniques of smoking, and sometimes you just take a piece of coal and you put it in the food and allow the smoke to spread. We have a pohe dish that we make that way. Now, where else will you find that sort of stuff, It's a technique. It's not just a poha. There are 3-4 different ways of making it. So I wanted to find all these different techniques and put them down in a book so that somebody one day will say in a New York kitchen, Foodie the gravy. And that guy, no matter where he's from, whether he's from New Orleans or he's from Portugal, he's going to know what it means in the same way that he knows what deglaze a pan. So that was interesting to me, to sort of give it a more scientific bent of, to research it.
And just the other part was, this is a different question. In your 4 years of research, did you notice the cuisine? How did the cuisine affect the people, or how, when you traveled around, did you notice that a certain cuisine made a certain kind of people, the north versus the south? Was that interesting for you?
Yeah,
For example, if it's a strictly vegetarian area, it creates a certain kind of people versus the north, whatnot.
Well, it's different. It's a difficult question because did the egg come first or the chicken? Are the people this way because of the food they eat, or is the food the way it is because of how they cook it? How they live. I think the first place you start is the geography. People use the ingredients that are easily available and inexpensive. And then they make, things from it. So, for instance, we use a lot of coconut because it's easily available. In the Konkan, traditionally, we also cook with coconut oil. And Konkan food, it's very different from North Indian food as equally tasty. But, for instance, we don't do a lot of deep frying and deep cooking. So we would give foodie, and then the vegetables will be added. They'll be quickly tossed, and then some fresh coconut would be put on it, and it would be served. That would be making an usal or an upkari, as they would say in Konkani. Even our curries, for instance, you roast the spices in a tawa, and then you grind them quickly, and you throw them into coconut milk. So it's a very different way of cooking. So maybe I could possibly say that if you go to Goa or you go to Kara, people are very easygoing. It's a very casual culture. There are lots of siestas and, lots of big meals, and fish is fried quickly on the spot because it's just been fished. So,
What are the varieties of kokum?
There's only, kokum comes from the mangosteen plant. It's a purplish fruit when it's ripe. And then they dry it, and actually they soak that fruit in, again and again, in kokum liquid to intensify it. Kokum is one kind of souring agent. And then in Konkan cuisine, we have many other kinds of souring agents too, which include, as I said, bilimbi and ambadi, but there's only one kokum.
In market, we find 3 types.
Yeah, they depends on how they are dried, but they're not different species.
It's like flour, half flour.
Yeah.
One is absolutely black. And one more is kokum full.
Yeah.
That is from Gujarat, I think.
No. They're all from the same plant, but they're used for different things. For instance, some are used for making sharbats. Some are, you'll also get the version that's very hard. Have you seen the version? It's the same thing. It just depends on how it's dried and at which level of ripeness it is plucked from the tree.
Oh, that's the reason. Because it is tasting different in different
Yeah,
varieties.
it will, yes.
Dal, it is different in up and then.
The color will be different, and it'll probably be a little bit more sour.
One more thing.
Yeah.
Soul curry. What is soul curry?
Solachi curry.
Soul मतलब क्या?
Sol refers to amsol, which refers to kokum, because you always use kokum when you make sol curry.
I thought soul, S-O-U-L.
No, in a sense, there is a restaurant by that name, right? Yeah, but it is the soul of Konkan food. That's a very good point. Very good point. And it's made in different ways. In the Malavan, you add black peppercorn paste to it. The Pune style of making sol curry is very different. The Karwari style is very different. So it depends where you eat it.
How come you don't see mangosteen if it's kokum is made from mangosteen? You never see the fruit.
Because it's dried.
All dry.
Yeah. What you do, I mean, if you go travel down the Konkan, the fruit when it's ripe is very sweet. It's very tasty. Yeah. So it's eaten as a fruit also.
It's based on some insights which I personally have gained over the years. I mean, nowadays we see, when I switch on the TV, there is a different section for food news which was not there some years back. I mean, there are 10 channels like Food Australia, Food, from across the globe. There is an access to information through the internet. And there are companies who are coming into India, popularizing their own cuisines, be Italian or French. Even the habits of from the grassroots, children's changing over the years. Now birthdays being celebrated at pizza outlets. So how do you see this changing, and what are the avenues which we see to preserve this Indian cuisines, the original cuisines? Of course, one of them being your book. So what are the avenues which you see as for preserving our original culture of food in India?
I think this is a great time in our lives for Indian food, okay? Having said that, I hate the term Indian food because there is no such thing as Indian food. India is too vast and different, which nobody really understood, especially the foreigners, that there is no such thing as Indian food. There is either Lucknowi food, there is Delhi ka khana, there is Kashmiri food, there is Gujarati food, there is Maharashtrian food, there is Brahmani food, so there is no such thing as Indian food. But what is known as Indian food in the West, which is Mughlai food essentially, chicken tikka masala and all that, is changing. If you take London, for example, where there is a very large influence of India in the United Kingdom, in England, unlike in the US, where the US still has a lot of their own stuff, you're seeing a lot of new chefs, new restaurants doing regional cuisine. So on this, and they're expensive fine dine restaurants, yeah? So it's going to cost you 60 pounds, 70 pounds a person if you eat there. But they are doing things starting from a Bengal kosha mangsha mutton to kolbisa khadkadla, which is very pathare prabhu, to vangacha kapta, literally. And they're going into regional cuisines. And strangely, the people who are loving the food are not the Indians. It is the Westerner, the slightly evolved Westerner, I must confess, okay? The slightly evolved Westerner who is liking the food. Yeah, no, you find, especially in an area like, say, Barnes in London, which has a lot of artists and actors and painters and that kind of stuff, they're going and really enjoying the food. So I think it's a good time for Indian food in the West at the moment. It's becoming a preferred cuisine. So the way the Chinese took over international food abroad, it's slowly happening. And I think it's a good thing. And although one feels very unhappy that only the tandoori chicken and only the bastardized version of the vindaloo is what is sold there, they are the entry points for a great future,
I just wanted to shift gears here. One aspect of food is basically connected to the family rather than, of course, going out is very helpful, but in the whole realm of family, in terms of values, in terms of culture, in terms of relationships, in terms of making decisions. Okay, we see that if it's a marriage or if it's an engagement or if two people are going out for a date and things like that, you know, how much of the choice of food and dishes help in promoting values, relationships, and decision making and making an agreement. You know, there are where our major decisions are concluded by a good dinner or something like that. So do you touch anything on those lines in terms of building relationships over sharing of food and what kind of dishes or what kind of understanding there should be between the people who are having the food?
You know, this whole book is basically based on a life that was spent eating with family. And with, you know, my mother being a brilliant cook and my grandmother being a very devoted and excellent cook. And it's a good question. For instance, you know, in the book I've mentioned that we have this ceremony called the Kande Pohe ceremony in a lot of families, where when the boy comes to see the girl will make this Kande Pohe and serve it. And she would be judged by that Kande Pohe. So I'm not sure how fair and ideal it is anymore. But I do think, I mean, it's funny, a lot of my friends and of my generation or my age group, they don't cook. They're very afraid to cook, or they don't know anything about it, or some of them even think that it's, you know, why should I do it, like if somebody else can do it. And I do understand that, you know, people don't have that much time anymore. There are a lot of responsibilities. And that's where this whole question of food culture becomes very interesting, because how many cultures cook at home still? You know, if you ask yourself that, there aren't so many left, especially urban food cultures where most of the cooking is still, we're one of the few cultures where the cooking is still done at home. You know, we say we have a lot of restaurants and eateries in Mumbai, but compared to the population, if you compare us, say, to New York, we have far fewer restaurants. I mean, it's hard to get a total number of restaurants if you start counting vendors and everything, but we are still a food culture that cooks at home and very often eats together. And I think that that's a really important value to retain, even though it's hard to do. And that's why I always tell men, I encourage them to cook, because you'll share the sharing, in a sense. You'll do some of it too, and you won't always relegate it to someone else.
Yeah, and I just want to add one more thing to this, is that, you know, at a certain level, the food becomes unimportant, but the eating together becomes more important, you know. And I find this amongst people of my age who've got old parents now, people younger than me whose parents are around my age, is that families, and this is not as cliched as it sounds, you know, literally the families that eat together stay together. And it's that thing, if you make it into a unsaid rule, that come what may, we're going to try and be, if you live in the same house, of course. The worst is when you're living in the same house and you don't eat together, you know. That at 8:30 or 9 o'clock, we will all try and eat our dinner together. It's a great achievement. And one more last thing is that food, everybody on earth can talk about food. You may be rich, you may be poor. You may have very little money, you may be vegetarian, non-vegetarian. There are two things in India everybody can talk about: cricket, which I can't talk about, and food. And I've found this, I can walk into a room and I don't know anybody, but they will strike up a conversation about food, and we are very close to each other by the time we finish. Okay, thank you
Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah.